attention, BART riders.
Hey, San Francisco, I'm Ben Kaplan, and this is the podcast where we define who we are and who we want to be.
We are diverse.
We are innovative.
We are inclusive.
We are change makers.
Problem solvers.
Activists.
Leaders.
Citizens.
We are open-minded.
Optimistic.
There's hope for a better tomorrow. And you gotta give them hope.
This is the podcast that's more than a podcast.
San Francisco, they are the world champions.
We are San Francisco. Hey, San Francisco. Today we're chatting with Mary Jung, former chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party and a key political power broker in our city. Mary's career spans more than 50 years. She first made a name for herself as a volunteer for George McGovern's presidential campaign, and then as a women's equal pay and equal rights activist for Cleveland Women Working, a labor movement featured in the documentary 9 to 5, currently streaming on Netflix. From her current perch as Director of Government Relations and Community Affairs at the San Francisco Association of Realtors, Mary has led efforts related to some of our city's most notable political fights, including the successful 2022 District Attorney recall, a campaign that Mary chaired. Mary also founded the Welcome Home Project in 2015 with Mayor Ed Lee, which has helped more than 10,000 homeless individuals and families settle into their new homes. So why is the political culture so divisive in San Francisco between so-called progressives and moderates? And what kind of influence does money have in city politics? Let's find out with Mary Jung. Mary, to start with, how would you characterize the political culture of San Francisco? Just the way people interact. I've heard people say it's brutal. Some people have called it a knife fight in a phone booth. Is that true, or are people overstating things?
So I believe that's true. I would just use the word challenging. I come from a time when people worked on both sides of the aisle, worked together, figured out the compromises, and tried to make government work. San Francisco, in its local edition, is very much like what's going on nationally, where you've got two sides that are not talking to each other to come to meaningful solutions. It's really unfortunate because at the end of the day, the two sides are really not that different. I always thought that we were differentiated from very, very small details.
And how did we get to this point? Because you look at a city that's 9 out of 10 people are registered Democrats. Really, you're looking at a divide that is more of a, if you're going to characterize it, sort of moderate centrist, and then more of a further left faction, which kind of in the city calls itself progressive, but that's sort of a difficult label because people that are moderate centrist in San Francisco might be considered progressive nationally. And with all of these folks that largely agree in a city that is largely dominated by one party, how did we get to this point? Why are we here now?
So, again, I'm going to point to what's been going on nationally for probably the last 30 to 40 years. I remember working on the Clinton-Gore campaign back in 96. I was the executive director of the San Francisco campaign. And back then, we could start to see the divide. Maybe 10 years before, it was a lot more collegial. You heard about people going out together after meetings and going out for a drink and just trying to figure out how best to work together. It was more collegial. And nowadays, that just doesn't happen. It's just very small. I remember, I think a lot of people may remember Jane Morrison, who was also a Democratic Party chair and, just like an icon in the progressive movement in San Francisco. And pretty early on in my career in the Democratic County Century Committee, I couldn't understand what the difference was. And I had a long conversation with her about issues. And I just went through all the different issues that progressives and moderates talked about. And the only thing we really disagreed on was, I guess what we would call now conservatorship. I really believe that if somebody was really ill, really couldn't take care of themselves, I really thought, and there was no family around to take care of them, that somebody had to step in and that it was inhumane not to.
your individual will superseded that, and we couldn't put someone in a conservatorship. So that was a clear difference in policy. But a lot of other things, even though you were supposed to be at different ends of the limited San Francisco spectrum, you actually agreed on quite a bit.
On most things. It was just tiny little details, right?
And so I've often wondered, doing this podcast, I've talked to a lot of people from all parts of the government or different community groups or different stakeholders. And one of the things I've asked is, would we get a lot more things done if just the mayor and the board of supervisors had dinner every month and went to someone's house and that person was in charge of cooking and they all came together? It seems like a silly idea, but if the relationships were better, is that impacting what we can accomplish and the results residents and citizens are getting? The fact that relationships are involved, egos are involved, it sort of seems like people raise themselves up by pushing other people down. If everyone was just like better friends, would that actually make a better city? Or is that just dressing on top?
I'm not sure. You would think that the more that you can see people like family members as friends, the more commonalities that you have, right? On the other hand, it's as you said, it may not amount to anything. But I would like to think that it would, but I don't think you can force people to do that.
I want to move on to actual kind of issue-related topics and where we're at, but maybe a final question is, who bears responsibility for the political climate now? Does Mayor Breed bear some responsibility for this because she's on the top and she sets the tone? Is it the board of supervisors because, Mayor Breed comes from the board of supervisors? There's a certain kind of ethos there. Is it just the specific people involved that are sort of getting into it at meetings and you hear staffs are like instructed not to talk to each other? Like this staff don't talk to that staff and we don't interact and communicate. Like, is there any blame to go around for the culture, or is this the culture? It is what it is.
So we created the culture. We bought into the culture, and it's fine for us to point at all the elected representatives, from the mayors to the board of supervisors to everybody. But the voters also had a say in it. I mean, for voters for many years, we like to think of ourselves as the city of St. Francis. We are the city that takes care of people. We are the city that's compassionate. And so when you're given these choices, people opted to be kinder and gentler. And I think that led us to where we are today, where we've elected the people where we are today. I mean, I think that not all of them, but many of our members of the Board of Supervisors are simply representing what the people thought they wanted. Then we had COVID, and people were able to look back at what was going on and realize that, oh my God, I voted for all these members of the Board of Education who are not allowing our children to go back to school. And instead, they are wasting our time and our money on ridiculous projects like renaming schools, okay? In a perfect world, you can do all that. But when you've got children that are sitting at home, that are having nervous breakdowns, who are not being able to learn, do your job. And so I think that what happened in the recall campaigns with the school board, with the district election, people realized that, our votes really do matter. And you know what? We're going to exercise our right as citizens, and we're going to make a difference, and we're going to try to make it different than what we voted on and make it better.
And is that a form of, I guess you'd call it more generally like buyer's remorse, right? Where you buy, I don't know, that expensive painting that looked really good in the store, then you get it home and you put it on the wall, and then you're like, do I really like that? I'm not sure. Do you think the recalls in 2022, Board of Education, a district attorney, was that like voters' remorse? Or was it just that, I didn't realize that this vote, that I just kind of went along with because I saw it in the DCCC, voters guide and seemed fine and I did it, actually has like a real consequence to whether my kids are back in school or not?
To me, as an Asian woman, it was a matter of life and death for our community. I'm sure I had a child who went through public school, but I think that if I had a kid who was in public school today, I would have been up in arms. In general, I do not support recalls. The Republicans tried to recall Governor Gavin Newsom. I was wholly against that, donated money to that campaign, just to make sure that, the message would come across that he was an okay governor, right? In this case, I just really think that citizens had to say something. I mean, I don't know, by the second year when Chesa Boudin was in office, whether or not we could stand to have another 2 years, okay? And if we did have to have another 2 years, because a lot of times in these races, people are just automatically reelected, Did we want to make sure that we wanted to do everything that we can to make sure he didn't get a second term? And, even like when we were talking about the recall, my original goal on the recall was to educate voters on public safety and what could be done and what these different offices were and how they could impact us. And whether or not he got recalled or not, we didn't know, because San Franciscans in general, and because we're a Democratic city and Gavin Newsom comes from San Francisco, are very anti-recall. And so, but I thought the education component was really, really useful and important.
One of the things we've discussed on this podcast is really those two recalls in 2022 were movements that formed, right? They're really movements, and especially the Board of Education recall was a really organic movement, right? Like before a lot of the sort of political professionals and other get it over the hump, it had been to 25,000 signatures just organically there as well. Yet those movements, I think a lot of the relationships people involved in them stayed, and that got a lot more people involved in local politics and civic engagement, but they didn't really stay around as a movement because largely it was mission accomplished, right? It was because why? Because there was a recall, there's a recall vote, people were recalled, we're done. Do you think those people, though, the communities, in particular Asian community, especially on that Board of Education recall, do you think those movements can continue in some kind of positive direction that isn't driven by a recall, but is driven by what we want to accomplish? Is there a movement there that's bubbling under the surface that we could tap into for the change we need?
So for the immediate future, I think citizens are still looking for change. They're seeing that they can actually do something. I shouldn't say they, because it's really the big we. So we saw that we could make change. We saw that that there are still problems out there, and that we need to continue working. There was a period a year or so ago where I was wondering whether or not citizens would think, oh, okay, we recalled these 4 people and we're done, right? But that wasn't the case. Citizens still wanted to see change and started voting for supervisors who reflected their views on public safety and education. Joel Engardio worked very, very hard on the school board recall, and also in the district attorney's office. Matt Dorsey helped on the recall of the district attorney. And so, I do believe that going forward, citizens are still awake and want to see change.
And how important is the DCCC, but essentially the Democratic Party of San Francisco? There's new elections in March coming up. And really, it's a battle for who controls the central party, because that party, would you say, produces a voter guide. And what's in that voter guide influences how a lot of people vote. So not a lot of people focus on it. There's a slate of candidates that, whether it's a more sort of centrist, moderate slate or a more like far left, it's going to characterize as progressive slate. How important is that vote coming up in March? And do people need to pay more attention to it when a lot of people, don't really traditionally?
People need to vote down ballot. The DCCC race is on the bottom of the ballot, and it's going to be a really long ballot, okay? And so I'm encouraging people, I'm encouraging candidates to make sure that their friends understand that they have to vote for all 10 or 14 candidates. They can't just vote for their best friend, or their relative and call it a day, right? So you don't absolutely have to have the Democratic County Central Committee endorsement to win, but it helps. And especially on down ballot races where people really are not paying attention. I mean, in the past, I think in every school board race but was one candidate, if you received a DCCC endorsement, you won, other than one time. Okay, which is pretty significant. And it wasn't the teachers union, it wasn't the League of irritated voters, or any of the or Bernie Kratz. It was the Democratic County Central Committee slate card that was the most important and carried today.
As a former head of the Democratic Party in San Francisco, what is your perspective now on where the party has sort of gone, sort of the official body? And there's been, news about more infighting, like certain like Democratic clubs that traditionally, like if you met all the requirements, you'd just be a club. And now, there was some pushback on whether they should be allowed to create their own club. And what is your feeling just as being a former chairperson of it, of where the Democratic Party in San Francisco is now?
I thought that was really unfortunate. That was the first time I had ever heard of the Democratic Party, since 1995, not chartering a club. Eventually they did the right thing, but it should have happened at that first vote. And, again, it just shows how people are ostracized from each other, and we shouldn't be.
And it seems like one of the things that was traditionally something that everyone in a party, and maybe everyone in both parties, though people kind of try to do it strategically on this, would agree on, is that we've got to turn out the vote. We've got to get people engaged. One of the things that's healthy in a democracy is you need citizens who are involved and educated and participating. And it was okay. I don't know if this was a more quaint time, how people viewed it, but like people would encourage people, go out and vote, even get involved. Even if it's not for how I would vote or how I would do it, that's okay because the health of our democracy is dependent on people getting involved. Where did that kind of feeling go? Because that used to be like, no one would even disagree with that, right? Everyone was for getting out the vote. But now it's almost like, no, only get out the vote if you agree with me. And if you don't agree with me on this other 5%, like we hope you never show up and don't get involved. It feels like that when it was never like that before.
So I don't agree with it. I mean, for me, I want everyone to go out to vote. And if you look back at the history of the Democratic County Central Committee, for years, our main goal was to educate voters and get them out to vote. And there was a period, I think it was like in the 1980s, where a lawsuit was filed by certain Central Committee members where they wanted the party to do endorsements. And it was at that point when we started to do endorsements that the rupture started within the party. There is this thing in the Democratic Party where, because it's so down ballot, that the more well-known your name is, the better chance you have of winning. My thing when I was chair was that if you're an elected official, you win a seat, would you please not run again to allow room for the grassroots, okay? So no matter what side of the aisle you were on, as a grassroots volunteer, you had a chance of being an elected member of the Democratic County Central Committee, and it also grew the bench, right? So that has not happened in recent years. There was one year where I think out of 17 seats, 17 of the candidates were elected officials. And of course, they all won. They didn't have to raise a penny. They didn't have to put up a house sign. They didn't have to go door to door. They won just on the basis of their name. And whether or not they did anything for the party afterwards, many of them resigned immediately or within the first 3 months and had someone else appointed who thought similar to them. To me, that was just wrong. It might have been clever. It might have been strategically smart, but it was wrong. And I would like to think that the party will not continue that way. On the other hand, you've got to fight fire with fire. So if you want to save the city, you've got to do a lot of things to win.
Hi, I'm Ben Kaplan, a passionate advocate for City College of San Francisco, and I'm running for the Board of Trustees. Our college is key to solving our city's toughest challenges, from creating essential worker pipelines to achieving financial security and reigniting enrollments. But we need your help. Donate now to support free tuition and transform City College into a model of educational opportunity. Join us in making a difference. Visit votebenkaplan.com to find out more. Now back to the show. If all of us have on our shoulders sitting maybe better angels, more like angels that want to win, another way to put it, let's say, the problem is that in theory, we should have our better angels coming out, but then it's also an arms race. Like any other arms race, right? The other side is arming up. So then you have to arm and then they have to rearm. And you're like, how did we get to this point? Even though, in my mind, I think it's just like freedom of speech, right? If you believe in freedom of speech, you believe in the right to someone else who disagrees with you to stand up and say that with full voice. And you believe in freedom of speech so much that that's okay. Good for them. And if you believe in democracy, if you really believe in democracy, then you believe that this give and take between this side, the other side, what results from it gets us to a better place, right? Ultimately, the best ideas will come to the top, and democracy relies on that. And so we believe this in theory, but then circumstances are different. And probably if I just made that little mini speech I just made right there, people say, very naive. That's not how it works, right? Whatever. the candidates he supports are going to lose.
You sound like you're from my generation.
And here's my question then. Do we need, if we're going to change the tone and get things done, do we need more people from outside politics who are not a political insider to get involved? And now I'm asking this to a political insider, which of course you are, Mary, but it's been commented that almost all the Board of Supervisors members are mostly career politicians. Do we need other perspectives or just people who think of things a little bit differently?
Well, the thing is that the minute you throw your ring into running for office, all of a sudden you're considered an insider and a career politician. I mean, someone like, let's say, Joe Longardio, right? I guess he's considered an insider, but he's also a grassroots person. I mean, he started coming to events, just your everyday average citizen. The same way I started volunteering in campaigns. I was at a bus stop and the bus was late and I ended up talking to staffers and volunteers at the McGovern for President campaign. So you can do the math to figure out how old I am, right? And up until then, I was just a regular person who was about to vote in my first election, right? And then now I'm considered the insider because I've done things. But at some point, we're all insiders. You're an insider, whether you like it or not. Whether or not, are they effective? I think it helps that when you are in elected office, it helps to know something about what you're running for, okay, and how the wheels work, okay? I think that's probably more so in higher office than it is in lower office.
Want to join our movement to get San Francisco back on track? Attend a We Town Hall event or stop by our popular We Happy Hour meetups. Better yet, join our data team, take the census, or help us audit the city budget. To join the movement, text us at 415-301-6700. That's 415-301-6700. Or learn more at wesanfrancisco.org.
And what do you think about this kind of push and pull? So recently, of course, you have Mayor London Breed, who's been in office for a number of years now. You have other people running for mayor like Asha Safai, who has been on the Board of Supervisors, another person who's from that background. And then you have, recently announced Daniel Lurie, who has not held public office before, but has, been the head of a nonprofit in the city, announcing. And the minute this happens, it was interesting to sort of see the dynamic, what people said. So of course, Daniel Lurie comes in and says, I'm an outsider. We need someone who's not from the system that's broken to fix it. And then immediately from Mayor Breed's people say, well, we don't need a beginner. We've got serious problems now. He's a beginner. And then that's like kind of the normal give and take. Like, are they both wrong? Are they both right? How do you, for the situation we're in, what kind of leader do we need to get out of this? Or is that all just political posturing?
So, full disclosure here. I've known Mayor Breed since she was like 25 years old. And I met her on one of her first paid political campaigns, working for Willie Brown's reelection. So I've known her for a long time before she became the ultimate insider by being in the mayor's office. And she does understand how the wheels turn. And I think that's extremely helpful. I think that she would be helped more if we had more elected officials who could work alongside her. And so it has helped that we have Catherine Stephanie, we have Joe Longardio, we have Matt Dorsey, people like that who can help support her and to help make the right things happen.
And there's two characteristics about local politics in San Francisco that I'd love your opinion on that are very distinctive to San Francisco. The first one is ranked choice voting. This idea that you don't just vote, who do you want to vote for, whether that's mayor or board of supervisors, but you actually rank people. And then essentially, it's almost like, I always describe it like it's, if you've ever watched the TV show Survivor, like someone's kicked off the island and then you take all the second place votes and then they contribute until someone is chosen. Do you think ranked choice voting, I hear all different sides of, does it encourage more moderate selections because, someone can, if you don't polarize too many people, you get more votes. I also hear that, people form strange strategies to try to game the system and form coalitions. It just causes politicians to do what politicians do, which is be political and try to figure out a way to win. What is your feeling on the effect of ranked choice voting in San Francisco?
So I remember when ranked choice voting was first called instant runoff voting. And I was actually in the first lawsuit to try to stop instant runoff voting. And partially because I really thought that it would dilute the power of immigrant communities. And as it turns out, we were right, unfortunately, that if you look at how the Board of Supervisors was beforehand, there were many more women, many more gays, many more people of color. And after that, it's become a little bit more homogeneous. Would that be the word? And so it started off as instant runoff voting. You were supposed to be able to get the results right away, right? And that whole thing about building coalitions and all that stuff, that was still out there. But then they changed it to ranked choice voting because there was no such thing as an instant runoff anymore. I mean, the way that it was sold originally to the voters was that, okay, you have a general election in November, and if nobody gets 50+1 of the vote, then you have an election within like 5 to 6 weeks, which was called the runoff, right? And what they were saying is that not enough people were voting in the runoff, and so people who were winning were not really reflective, right? And, I can see why people would be against a 5-week voting period, right? I mean, my solution at the time was that we should just change our San Francisco calendar to the national calendar, where our general election would be during the primary, and if no one got 50%, then you would have the runoff in November, kind of like what we do right now, right? But electors who heard that thought, that makes a lot of sense, but we're not going to do that. So, okay. So now we have what we have today.
Why would it diminish representation from different minority groups or niche groups? Why would ranked choice voting encourage that?
So I'm not sure why, but that has been the result. Go back and look at the result. Same thing with district elections. I mean, I know that people really, I understand the whole thing about district representation, but we had a much more diverse board when we had citywide elections.
Sure. Well, and do you think that as what people point to that as a struggle between, we generally have more moderate centrist mayors that have to represent the whole city. And then we have more extreme board members that don't have to represent the whole city. Do you think that creates this type of gridlock and animosity that we've seen? Or is that actually checks and balances in action? And it's just that, what politics is the art of the possible, and you got to consider the whole group, and you got to consider individual areas, and that's what it should be. Do you think that we create gridlock by kind of the nature of how we choose mayors versus the Board of Supervisors?
So all of what you said is true, okay? But I don't think that that's gridlock, okay? I mean, when you're saying that drug dealers who've been arrested several times, okay, caught on film, are put through a revolving door, that's not gridlock. That's just perpetuating a terrible situation.
Sure. Of course, I agree with you on that directly, especially on that issue. I just wonder, in some ways, people describe politics, what they'll describe as a flaw, sometimes could be viewed as a feature. From the tech world, they call it, is this a feature or is it a bug? And the fact that, people will say the flaw is that we can't agree, we can't get things done. The chief executive of the city is too weak. We need to give more power. Usually that's when, you have the chief executive, maybe the policies you want in there. You're like, I want to get more of those through. And then other people will say, well, no, the reason we have different branches of government is specifically for this reason. Is like, there is no king of San Francisco. There's no emperor of San Francisco. You've got to, if you want to get your policies through, you've got to lead. And so that's just the question of where you fall on that. I personally feel it ebbs and flows. There are moments, right, where there's, you have certain mayors like Willie Brown was kind of famous for this, where more things get centralized. And you have other things where more power kind of ebbs the other way. But I just wonder, I was just curious if you find that's, some people are calling for systemic change in, the charter of San Francisco. And others people say, no, we don't need that. We just need to get aligned on issues where we need results. And that's all we need. We don't need systemic change. And I just was curious where you fell on that.
Yeah. So in general, I don't believe that you change a policy, an entire policy, just because something happened and you didn't like that vote. Okay. But, I do want people to remember that San Franciscans did put in charter reform in the 90s at the time when Willie Brown was elected. Okay. And our charter reform was to go to a strong mayor government. Okay. And I think when people voted for that and we got Willie Brown as the next mayor, no one realized how strong a mayor could really be. Okay. And then in the meantime, then we ended up with district elections. There was a slow chipping away of the power in the mayor's office. How is it fair that, okay, so let's just say there's 7 planning commissions, okay? And the board gets to appoint 3 of them. Okay, that's fine. They just go through. The mayor gets to appoint 4, but hers have to be approved by the board. But basically, they have 7 appointments, right? Okay, how is that fair? And I don't think that and this is one of the problems, in government is that there are always so many ballot measures put under good government, giving power to the people. And in the end, it really took power away.
It highlights something else, which is that sometimes you do things in a piecemeal fashion. They're individual commissions. And then you look back and maybe individually, it's like, okay, I can understand why you might want that. But then you look at it as the whole altogether, and you've just actually done something that's completely shifted in a major way what we're able to accomplish and get done. And no one actually voted on that whole package, right? They just voted on little changes individually, but over time, it had a result. Second thing I want to ask you about is just the role of money in San Francisco politics. Because another distinctive feature is that if you were going to contribute, and let's say you had unlimited funds to contribute, you could, I think for the California governor's race, contribute something like over $36,000 as an individual. In San Francisco, that's limited to $500. Does that mean that, California state government is more influenced by big money and San Francisco less so? Or does big money dominate? If you're a new person to politics, you're like, what is the role of money? Everyone says it's so important. What does it play? Kind of big money donors and big money in San Francisco.
I agree with the $500 limit. Okay. I mean, if they wanted to adjust it for inflation, I think it's fine. Statewide, like the governor's race, for instance, right? They have to run over a much larger territory.
Which usually is an argument for it because you have media buys in some of the most expensive media markets like LA, and it's just expensive. So that would be usually the argument made for it. Another way to ask the question is because you are at one time a political outsider, as you pointed out, but now a political insider. For those who are skeptical about the San Francisco system and who controls what and where the power is, maybe they've read stories in the newspaper about corruption. We've had a lot of them recently about corrupt officials. Just should they be skeptical about the role of money and big donors and sort of people always wonder about this kind of like shadow power that's out there that does that? Or is that overblown and not an issue in the city? Do the best ideas and the best people ultimately win?
So I don't want to say that the best people and the best ideas always win. Otherwise, we would not be in the pickle that we are in today, with the homeless and the drug addicted, right? Okay. I think that there's money on both sides. I'm more irritated by outside money and endorsements from people who don't know anything about San Francisco and saying, oh, I think that you should be doing this, right? And so, when I hear of some rock star or whatever, and I don't know if anybody's ever even influenced by this, or saying, well, yeah, I'm coming out for so-and-so, and say, okay, I don't know if that means any votes. But in the meantime, it makes, people feel like, oh, yeah, so-and-so likes me, right? It just bothers me because it's like, you don't live here. You don't see what's going on in these streets every single day. And you're saying that you think that this is a better candidate when you don't know anything about what you're talking about. So that probably bothers me more than anything, more than the money. I mean, I think the money comes on both sides. People could say, oh, they've got money from so-and-so, and say, well, yeah, but then you've got money from this other person, right?
And do you think that money is a necessary evil in sort of politics? Or do you think, no, it's just a way to amplify messages and it's just part of the playing field? It's what it is, both sides, and it's, roughly equal. And so it's not the determining factor in who's going to win in San Francisco, whether someone has a lot of access to money or not.
So everything you said is true. Everybody has access to messaging. Everyone has access to money. That's just the world that we live in. The truth is, I really haven't given it that much thought.
How hopeful are you now for change for the city? Do you think that, have we reached the bottom? Are we trending back up in the right direction? Are you hopeful that voters are going to make choices in 2024 that are going to get us to a fresh start in sort of new opportunities and choices? Or do you still feel like we've got a ways to go and we're too divided and it's unclear what that outcome will be?
So I'm a half glass full person, okay? And so I would go with what you said originally, that the city is on its way up. Now, I was with a group of people last night who would swear that positively is not true. But in my neighborhood and in my driving around the city, in my interactions with people, I see that there's a change. Is there a huge change? No, but if it's incremental, it's okay, as long as it's incremental on the way up.
And what would be your recommendation? There's a lot of people who listen to the podcast now. It's been growing every week, who are new to getting involved, new to politics, new to civic engagement. And I know from being in meetings when you were there that you have like usually a number of people who are like newer people getting involved. You mentor different people to try to get them involved and give them opportunities. And you have, kind of sometimes a young crowd around you who are sort of eager and high energy, which I've seen. Given that, what is your recommendation for getting involved if you're not someone who's plugged in, but you're either angry or frustrated or motivated or whatever it is, and you want to do something like you did back at the bus stop years ago? What should they do now?
You should look at the issues that interest you. You should try to figure out, you should go and visit all the clubs. I mean, if you want to be a democratic activist, there's clubs in the entire spectrum, okay? And you can just kind of like Google it and just try, look in the Central Committee list and just try to figure out which is the club that you think meets your needs, right? Go visit them. See whether or not that's, what you're into. And so keep your eyes open, look at both sides, figure out where it is that you are, but also be rational about it. I mean, my son is 36 now, right? But when he was younger, he was much like me, okay? Just very, very progressive in his thinking. So in Ohio, I'm considered progressive. In San Francisco, I'm not. My son and I would have these discussions, and he'd say, he'd have a point of view about graffiti, for instance, right? And then I would give my point of view, and it was thoughtful, right? And so I encourage that people have that type of exchange so that they have a better understanding.
And what is your suggestion for someone who's outside of the system, who's thinking of maybe running for office for the first time? But it's daunting, right? When you're not part of it, it seems like either A, where do you even start? Or B, wow, politics is brutal and people are going to come attack me and I just want to make the city better. I don't really sign up to be attacked. What is your recommendation for them if they could be a candidate for something?
So first of all, a lot of people come to me about running for office. And whenever I ask them, what is it that you're trying to do? They always say, I'm trying to make positive change. And I always reply, you do not have to be an elected official to make positive change. In fact, you might be able to make more changes by not being an elected official and just being smart and strategic. And a really good example I was thinking about the other day, I saw a friend of mine, Ted Fang, receive an award for something. He's never run for office, but he started an organization called San Francisco Hep B Free, which is a liver disease that affects 1 out of 10 Asians. Okay, that's a huge number when you think about that worldwide. The World Health Organization believes that in our lifetime, in my generation, Hep B free is going to be eradicated. This is someone who did something that's profoundly meaningful, but did not run for public office, but was smart and understood how to work strategically within the system to get something done that affects millions of people worldwide.
Mm-hmm. And that's one person choosing to make something happen. And it means you don't need a fancy title. You don't need a position that's official. It's just the will to make something happen and sticking with it over time.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing.
The other thing I wonder about is, there's always instances of people who just make things happen on their own. But it's a little bit maybe easier, maybe more fun to do it together, to do it with the group. One of the core beliefs I have is we is greater than me. We're always greater together than we are individually. So what does it take as someone who's rallied different individuals and groups together in San Francisco to get more people on board, to get it so you don't have to be out there by yourself, alone, fighting the good fight? Some people do, and they're successful at it. But you can do this with your friends and your family and other people you know. How do you get to we?
So you just start one at a time. I mean, Ted started one at a time. I mean, I remember when he called me and we barely knew each other, but I had heard about this organization he was starting and he needed to help with funding. And so he asked me to help with a silent auction. And I thought, well, this seems worthwhile. And it was something, he asked me to join him and to do something that I knew how to do. And, I ran his auctions for like 5 years, at the very beginning.
Right. So sometimes it's the power of asking people. And also it's aligning, you're asking for something, to your point, that like they know how to do, they contribute. You just never thought like, oh, I can actually contribute to what we do to fight this disease by using my skills in this way. Oh, that makes sense. I ought to do it. And sometimes it's just the power of asking and also asking the right people for something that they can actually do and deliver. And if you do that enough, some people will turn you down. But some people like Mary Jung will say yes, and then that leads to more things.
So another example I would give is, so my son went to Rooftop School, which has a very active parent volunteer base. And so I ran the fundraisers for a couple of years. I ran the art program for a couple of years. It was a very active parent art program. And my goal when I was doing fundraising and an art program was that every single person who came up to me and talked to me, I would ask them for something. And I would kind of like start at the top or what I thought that they could do. If they said no, I would just say, well, how about this? If they said no, well, how about that? And, by golly, everybody did something, okay? Whether it was just buying tickets to the event or taking charge of the entire wine donation for the event, right? You just have to ask and you have to think about it, right? And you have to remember to do it. A lot of times, like when I talk to young people, when they're talking about, well, what do I do? I'm going to this event. It's like, well, if you can kind of like figure out who you think is going to be at the event, or if you can figure out what you need to get done over the next week, figure out how you can make that happen at the event. So not only are you having a good time at the event, you're also moving, your program forward. Be smart about it. Be smart about your time. Time is valuable. I mean, once you go to that event and this person that you really need to talk to is there, if you're not prepared to talk to them, you might have lost that opportunity for 10 weeks or 10 months or 10 years.
Sure. And the other thing about what you said, I like your example of just, you ask for the big thing and then you ask for a little bit less and you keep doing until they say yes. Also, it can snowball to other things. So maybe someone says yes on a little thing now, but then they experience it, they get involved. It's kind of the sign holding theory of political engagement, which is sometimes you just start, someone gave you a sign and you held it up. Pretty soon, maybe a little bit down the road, you're running the Democratic Party in San Francisco like you did, Mary. But it starts maybe small. So it doesn't always have to be a big thing.
No, that's right. I started walking precincts for George McGovern on the west side of Cleveland. And no Chinese people. There were hardly any Asians in Cleveland at that time.
Which is actually another good point, that something about you that might be distinctive or different or unusual, that can be a great strength. That can be a great strength. So it's not always like, oh, I don't fit in with this because of whatever characteristic. It can be a great strength. Final question for you. How would you describe, how politics really works in San Francisco? It's been our theme for this episode. What would surprise people about how it really works that they just wouldn't expect?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think that it depends on who it is that you're talking to, right? I remember talking to, I had a conversation with Gavin Newsom when he was running for mayor. And I asked him what was the most surprising thing to him running for mayor. And he said to me, it was the fact that no one thought anything about whether or not he had a private life, right? And that every single moment of his life was consumed with being an elected official. I mean, he could just be doing something really mundane by himself in a corner and someone would find him, right? And he wasn't upset about it so much as he was just surprised at how all-consuming politics can be. And so I think a lot of times people think of politicians as these robotons, right? Who don't, that this is all they're in for. And what they'll find is that most politicians started from a really good place. And many of them are still in that really, really good place and really want to do good. And I think it's our job as voters to remind them where they came from and to remind them what we want.
Absolutely. And well said. Mary Jung, now citizen activist. You hang your shingle at SF Realtors, but you're involved in a lot of political happenings in the city, former chair of the DCCC in San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us on We Are San Francisco. And I'm hopeful for where things are going. I see you nodding your head, so I think you are too. And I just can't wait for the next year to 2 years to happen, because I think great changes are coming, and I think more and more people are working together. And thank you for all that you do to make that happen.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate this new organization you formed to bring people together in a positive way, to allow people to meet each other and talk about issues. So thank you for everything you're doing.
According to political insider Mary Jung, San Francisco politics in the year 2024 is all about two sides who are really not all that different, deciding not to talk to each other and choosing not to come together to find meaningful solutions. What's the result? The act of playing politics gets in the way of virtually everything we need to accomplish. Hey, progressives, shouldn't we actually achieve progress? Hey, moderates, why not actually work with all sides? After all, it wasn't always this way. As Mary says, before the era of local candidate endorsements, party political leaders from multiple perspectives would debate, maybe disagree, and then go out for dinner or drinks afterward. Voter engagement was encouraged, and not just by people who parrot your worldview. The belief was that by having a vigorous debate, ideas would be refined, democracy would be served, and the best people with the best proposals would rise to the top. So where did we go wrong? Is that vision of local politics at its best just an antiquated vision of a simpler time? Maybe, or maybe not. What San Francisco needs right now is less politics and more unpolitics. Let's strip away all of the labels. Let's be generous with who gets credit. Let's put aside personal self-interest for the greater good. San Francisco's political culture needs a fresh start, a reset devoid of the baggage of the past. How will we get there? By having a fresh cast of characters who are willing to engage. Yes, money is a powerful force in politics, but you know what else is? People coming together. Take a small portion of your skills, energy, and expertise and contribute it back to the community we love. Want to know how? You can start by texting 415-301-6700 to join the We movement. So spread the word. Tell your friends. Change is coming. We are San Francisco.
Hey, it's Ben Kaplan here. Want to join our movement to get San Francisco back on track? Attend a We Town Hall event or stop by our popular We Happy Hour meetups. Better yet, join our data team, take the census, or help us audit the city budget. To join the movement, text us at 415-301-6700. That's 415-301-6700. Or learn more at wesanfrancisco.org.
This was brought to you by Top Thought Leader. Find out more at topthoughtleader.com.